This week, it's the Starlink test episode. First, we welcome Eric Kedrosky, Chief Information Security Officer at Sonrai Security, to discuss why risk management in the cloud starts with identities. In the leadership and communications section, the CISO carousel and its effect on enterprise cybersecurity. CISOs are struggling to get cybersecurity budgets. Respectfully, I disagree, and more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly.
270. That's the average number of times a company comes under cyber attack each year. And the average cost of a successful data breach is $4.35 million. Cygnus ensures your internal and external teams are securely connected, confident, in control, and compliant during a cyber crisis. Visit securityweekly.com/Cygnus to learn more. That's CYGNVS. If your organization is ready to embrace edge computing, we have good news. The 2023 AT&T Cybersecurity Insights Report provides everything you need to know to get started. In the report, we identify the common characteristics of edge computing. We found edge use cases are rapidly coming online, and we reveal how to secure edge computing. Most importantly, you'll learn how to prepare for your edge ecosystem. Get your complimentary copy of the report today by visiting securityweekly.com/ATT Cybersecurity. That's securityweekly.com/ATT Cybersecurity. Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 322, recorded October 2nd, 2023. I am your host, Matt Alderman. I would first like to thank Adrian for hosting last week. We raised over $20,000 for our charity event. He was filling in for me. He did an awesome job, I heard. Joining remotely are my co-hosts, which I've missed the last couple weeks. First, Mr. Jason Albuquerque. We haven't talked football in like 3 weeks.
We haven't talked football in a while. I mean, it's the same old story, though. Patriots got whomped by the Cowboys. Your Browns didn't win. Actually, your Broncos actually pulled one off. And in college football, holy crap, University of Colorado almost put it to USC. I mean, they came close. They're stepping up their game.
They are. They got bumped by Oregon, who barely pulled it off against Tech at Texas Tech in Lubbock, because my son was at that game. Yeah. And so I thought there's no way they can keep up with USC, but they kind of regrouped after that butt whooping.
They did. I don't know. Coach Prime is pulling something out of his encyclopedias there.
Yes, he is. Also joining this week, my second co-host, Mr. Ben Carr. Hey, Ben.
Hey, Matt. How's it going? Nice to be with you today. It's here. It's supposed to get down into the high 70s next week, so kind of crazy. Getting some nice weather finally.
It was 67 degrees this morning when we got up. My wife's like, open all the windows. Yeah, we're going to test out this Starlink because I am running 100% on Starlink right now. We're going to see how well it performs compared to the AT&T MiFi, and I think so far so much better.
So good. Yep.
All right, let's hope for it. Security Weekly listeners, we are celebrating the milestone of reaching over 1,000 members of our CISO community. The Cybersecurity Collaboration Forum is a one-stop shop for executive collaboration comprised of CISOs across various industries. If you want to be part of this growing community of CISOs, join us as a member or technology partner. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/cybersecurity collaboration. That's a mouthful, cybersecurity collaboration. Eric Kedrosky is Chief Information Security Officer at Sonrai Security. Over the last 2 decades, Eric has honed his knowledge of security program development, security strategy, security assessment, research and policy development, and leadership development. Eric's passion for collaborating with customers, maybe celebrating too, and executives has made him a crucial member of the Sonrai Security team. Eric, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Hi. How's it going today, guys?
Good. I also hear you're a pretty good SOC 2 preparation or for an audit.
Yeah, we're just going through that, and I'm a little bit meticulous with my preparation, probably to the chagrin of most of my teams. But clean audits all around, fingers crossed. But that's how it goes.
Yes. So we're going to talk about identity, cloud, risk management, three of kind of my favorite topics. Like most people know, I'm an app user data guy, right? I've spent some time on the application security side of the house. I understand the importance of identity. We talk a lot about risk management on this show. And what I want to start with is what's different about the cloud that creates challenges for CISOs? Because I think it's a different environment, first of all, but why is it so important to understand the differences in order to understand risk in this new environment?
It's a couple of differences. I mean, there's some technological differences, there's some operational differences, and then there's just the way the teams work, and I think that all kind of fits together. I mean, from a technical perspective, when we moved to the cloud, we had these paradigm shifts in the way that we secure things. So in the data center, and I spent almost the first half of my career securing the data centers in various roles. And, we used to use networks, and we'd form little boundaries with our networks, and we put all of our tools on the borders of those boundaries and watch things go in and out. And that's how we generally secured stuff. And then we put agents on machines, and we did it that way. Along came the cloud, and that whole idea of the network as a boundary sort of went away. The cloud is very, very porous, and there is no real defined boundary in some cases. And at the same time, with the ephemeral nature of resources in the cloud, putting agents on things was a costly exercise when we first tried to do it. And in a lot of cases, when we're using serverless technology and services, it just doesn't make sense. So we kind of had to reframe the way we secure things. And at the heart of how the cloud works, what drives everything are identities, and not so much human identities, the Erics, the Bobs, the Steves, the what have you, but non-human identities or machine identities, whatever we want to call them. Those are things that really drive the cloud. The challenge comes in is when, as a security organization, we're not looking at those risks. We tend to look at what we know. And so we see a lot of organizations trying to secure their cloud through agents and vulnerability scanning and sort of those more traditional manners like a firewall and what have you. And I think that's where a lot of organizations tend to get themselves in a little bit of trouble and a lot of risk.
Yeah, we start with a very infrastructure heavy kind of program, right? And when you walk in, you've got firewalls, you got antivirus, you got these endpoint agents, you're doing vuln scanning, you have all these pieces. And when you move to the cloud, you think, I'll just take those tools that I've been using in my data center and I'll just try to shoehorn them into the cloud. It's not that easy though.
No, and some of them one that I always like to talk about because it's really easy to talk about is things like, AV scanners. Or vulnerability scanners. We used to put agents on boxes and do that. Well, sometimes there are no boxes to put things on, or sometimes boxes go up and down and left and right in matters of minutes, and they're not static. So that whole approach to doing it, well, it has its place in the cloud. The amount of visibility you get and the amount of risk that you want to measure is not quite the same. But at the same time, all these non-human identities are really controlling everything that happens. And a lot of organizations are not really taking that into account. And that's where the problem starts. And then, like I said, there's this whole thing about, once upon a time, the security teams had their place in the organization, and, network security team controlled the network, and maybe you had an endpoint security team that controlled the endpoints. You had a server security team that did that. In this new world, this sort of shift left DevOps sort of world, those boundaries have really blurred, and a lot of times security ends up in the lap of the application developer teams. And you've got the security organization being a bit more of a governance type organization. And I think this is where a lot of the risk comes in as well, because your application teams are driven to get code out the door quickly, not necessarily, secured in a way that a security team would. And I think you've got those dynamics at play as well. So we have a couple of these paradigm changes that aren't just technological. And then I think the last one is just general knowledge of the cloud. I mean, yeah, the cloud's been around for over a decade now, but it's still very, very new to a lot of people and a lot of organizations. And I think just when you layer all those three things together, these paradigm shifts, like I said, they tend to create a lot of problems for organizations, and they tend to create a lot of problems for CISOs.
Eric, on this show, we talk a lot about the say easy, do hard items of managing a cybersecurity and compliance program, right? And what are some of those essentials, especially today with so many organizations in hybrid environments, right? They still have some on-prem, they're dealing with multiple cloud providers. What are some of those essentials that organizations can stop focusing on? Because a lot of times, that say easy, do hard, we talk about asset management across the organization and people knowing what we have. So that inventory of your data, of your assets, of identity as an asset, right? What are some of those essentials that we need to be thinking about in these complex hybrid environments today?
I think about, I phrase it, there's two main categories I think about in data and identities. And we're talking about mainly because I'm coming at it from a cloud perspective, but it still applies. They're the basics. You need to have your inventory. So I think of it in these ways. In the identity side, I always ask 4 questions. Do I have an inventory of all my identities? And asterisks, those non-human identities. Do I really have an inventory of them? The second question I ask, do I know their end-to-end permissions? Not, does it look like what it has, or do I think is what it has? Do I really know what that identity can get access to? Because that's where lateral movement happens in the cloud. What data does it have access to? Or what resources really does it have access to? And what is it doing with that access? And then when you flip that coin over and take the data perspective, again, where is my data? And that's always a great question for the cloud, because you say, I've said to teams before, hey, where's all of our data? And someone pulls out the reference architecture for the production environment, says, there's our data. I'm like, no, that's where our data is supposed to be. Where is all of our data? The second question I always ask is, what is our data? Have we classified our data in a way that at least allows us maybe even a base level to dichotomize sensitive, non-sensitive, good, bad, holy shoot, oh, don't worry about that. You really need to do that, because that's where you need to focus your efforts. And then where this comes back together is, what can access my data? So what's the risk? And what are they doing with that? And that could be your incident to your event. And I think when you think about it in data and identity in those two perspectives, those are some really great ways to start off a cloud security practice, if you will, just starting with that stuff and getting answers to those questions.
I love that, Eric, because to be honest with you, that's a lot of the essentials that organizations need to be doing to prepare themselves for future innovation and transformation. I mean, There's a lot of conversation around AI, right?
Yep.
And having your own internal AI engine is going to have access to your data that you're using for your own benefit to your organization. And if you don't have your data inventory, you don't have those identities inventoried, and you don't have your data classified, that's where you're going to start getting all of that data leakage.
Yeah. And somebody asked me a question the other day, actually. I was on a similar thing about, AI and how does it, and I think they were expecting this sort of like mind-blowing answer to how to secure AI. And at the end of the day, the AI in your cloud, again, is going to be run by a service likely, and that service is going to use identities. And so it comes down to the same things. Whatever technology new comes out, especially in the cloud, is going to have access to data, and it's going to be run by an identity. And that's why that, in my mind, it has to be the focus of a cloud security strategy, and the way that I've tried to do it over the last almost decade or so.
So, Eric, I want to double click on the asset management problem, because we've talked about it a lot on the show. Yeah. It's not easy, right? It's hard enough for organizations to have a hardware and software asset inventory. But when we talk about identities, it's not just the identity, both human and machine identities. It's this concept of entitlements, right?
Yeah.
And when you think about the potential number of entitlements that identities can have in the cloud, we're talking a massive amount of data. Like how should organizations think about getting their arms around the asset inventory side, just from an identity perspective? We don't even have to talk data yet.
I really love this question, because the first part of the question is easy to answer, right? The inventory of your identities. The one great thing about the cloud, and I was literally just explaining this to my SOC 2 auditor when they asked for your server assets, right? The cloud inventories everything because they charge you for everything. So it's really, really easy to get your inventory in the cloud because it's there and you're getting charged for it. Now, the key point and why I love this question is the entitlements. That is the complicated one. That is not something that is easy to do because, a classic example I use, the user Eric might be sitting in a dev environment, and we'll use Amazon, for example, but a dev account, and the user Eric might sit in a group and it looks like the user Eric's entitlements are fine. Maybe due to a misconfiguration, Eric can assume to a user role, and then now I'm acting in not as just Eric, but I'm acting in the context of that role. Well, maybe that role allows me to move laterally through some more roles to get from dev to stage to prod to data. And it's really in the entitlements that are tricky, but it's really tricky to compute that. And that's where I think a lot of organizations, A, don't realize that is where the big risk is, and then B, how to do that. It's very complicated.
Yeah, because I think somebody told me, I think it was either the Caesars or the MGM attack. Somebody actually ended up with full admin rights in the Azure platform.
We were talking about this, yes.
Right? Were we talking about it?
You and I were talking about it. Yeah, and it's in all the articles I read about it, it's like buried there. Like it says it in one spot, and then you're like, wait a minute, they've spent all this time talking about some ransom server in a data center. When I read the level of permission that they potentially might or might not have got, because I don't think it's verified or whatnot, but let's assume that they did, the level of access they had to that cloud, you don't need malware to ransom stuff. You own the cloud. I mean, you could ransom the cloud natively using the native services. And it's crazy. And it kind of also went to show that we spent all this time talking about ransom servers when there was this belief that this high level of permission was gained in the cloud. And that was like a non-story. It was like buried in a paragraph. I mean, and that to me kind of echoes where we are right now in trying to understand the risks in the cloud. Because to me, that's a big story right there. It's like organizations like that are moving to the cloud, and other organizations, and someone gains an identity of that level. That's bad.
Yeah. So now let's go to the next layer, because now I have to do the data inventory. Again, I probably know what data services I'm running in the cloud because, again, as you said, the cloud providers are charging me for it. But it's more than that. Now it's the association of who has access to that data through these different identities and entitlements, which now adds yet another level of complexity to the asset management problem.
Yes. This one, that is of the cloud, that is one of the complicated problems of the cloud is entitlements. Because, all of these services, I mean, I think something across all three clouds, there's upwards of 40,000 different permissions across the three main clouds, GCP, Azure, and AWS. And it's growing daily, and they're adding new actions, they're adding new entitlements, and then they all come together in these combinations and permutations. And organizations really need to be looking at the end-to-end, or what I like to call the effective permission of these entitlements, to really see what resources such as data or services they have access to, what they can do with that access. And that's where I form the risk picture. The user Eric looks benign because he's in a dev account, but when I compute his entitlements through a couple of lateral movements using identities, he has access to production data. That's the risk we need to understand. And then the other complicated part is tracking that. So we might be aware of the risk, but did Eric do something? Did Eric actually use those permissions? Did I jump a role to a role to a role to a role and to do that? And that is one of the real challenges of securing the cloud these days.
So Eric, I mean, we talked about identity, we talked about data. At the leadership level, so many of us have to ensure that our organization is compliant, either from a vendor risk perspective, a regulatory perspective, a compliance framework perspective. How are you implementing these best practices so you can properly show auditors that you are compliant and compliant to their controls, but with the understanding that, it's a security first mentality, right? Strong security should equal compliance. But what are you doing to be able to show that you have the artifacts and the reporting and all of that information you need to show that you truly have a strong security posture in your cloud environment?
And I think the thing is, it comes back to traditional, risk management. And I really think of what CISOs do as risk management. That's just my, it comes back to, again, we talked about inventory. If I can show, yes, the cloud has the inventory, but if I can show how I'm keeping track of the inventory, and something we didn't speak to, but I really want to highlight is continuous inventory. That is the other sort of challenge of the cloud, is continuously inventorying your stuff. Not every 30 days, not every 60 days, not every 90 days. So you need that inventory. You need to be able to show that. That's sort of the foundation of what I show. Then the second thing is showing the entitlements of the identities, and you break them up in identities and focus on the data or the resources that are really sensitive. That's why you do the classification piece. You say, I've got these really sensitive resources, data, whatever, services, and I've got these identities. You have to show the linkages between them, and you have to show how you're connecting that. So again, oh my goodness, we found a user, Eric, in dev that has access to prod data. Show how you found that, and show those linkages, and also be able to show how it's repeatable. How are we doing this? What is a process to do that? In my role here, I work with a lot of our CISOs of our customers. And there's some really, really cool ways that they're doing this. And a lot of it is about incorporating this stuff in the cloud actually into your legacy, some of your legacy technology, and definitely your legacy processes. Because if you can go to your executive or your board or whomever and say, you know that thing we've been doing over here for 10 years and you've been hearing a lot about, and you see all the nice graphs and dashboards and whatever on, well, we've got this cloud, and if you can show how that fits into what you've been doing, that goes a really long way as a leader to show your leadership or your board how you're managing risk in the cloud. Because if not, you're spending so much of your time trying to explain the new. And to be honest, the education game takes so long that there as a CISO, that's where you're going to get in trouble as well. So try to fit it into what you already have in a way that works, so that people you're reporting it to understand in a way that they've seen probably for years and years at this point.
And that's a great point. That's a great point, Eric, because we talk a lot on the show about security leaders speaking the language of the business versus the business having to speak the language of cybersecurity. So if you already have a program where you're speaking the language of the business, that should be an easier transition into bringing a cloud environment into that conversation.
Yeah. And I know for this, you hear leaders talk, and I hear the same thing in podcasts, and it's, you said it, easy to say, but hard to do. So a really good example I've seen of this for our listeners is, I know in a very large organization with a lot of really sensitive data, a lot of identities, what they've actually done is they found a way to inventory their identities, map their entitlements so they understand what are truly the high risk identities, and they map that against the high risk data. But what they then do is they take that information and they feed it back into their PAM, their traditional PAM tool. And then they use the processes that they've already built in their traditional space, and they use the same reporting and dashboards that they've been using forever in their data center, so that when that CISO goes to that, it's a bank, when that CISO goes to that bank's board and presents the risk, it's just a new dashboard that looks the same, but that's how they've started to stitch it together. And that's sort of what I advise a lot of the CISOs that are moving to the cloud or made the move to the cloud, to say, well, how do I present risk in this space that we're all trying to get our heads around? And I always say, look to what you're doing and feed the data into that, because the leadership teams and the boards have, like I said, have probably already seen this before.
How are you finding the impact of that, in compliance and regulatory, right? Obviously that makes sense of presenting it in the same way to the board, so they're consuming it in a similar way. But are you finding that from a compliance and regulatory side, they're behind the times, and it's really hard to fit that into kind of the way you're running frameworks, and things that aren't as effective are really hard to explain to those people why you're not doing them?
Oh my God! I remember I was talking while we were before the show was about I'm in the middle of an audit right now, and I remember I've been doing this, and I like to say I don't have the physical scars, but I got the emotional and mental scars for sure. Mm-hmm. The first time going through an audit where we were had a piece of our technology in the cloud, and trying to talk to the auditors about, they're like, well, where's your firewall? Show me where your firewall is. I'm like, we don't have a firewall in the cloud, and we don't have this, and we don't have that, and it doesn't work that way. I find that in those spaces that you spend a lot of time doing that and trying to explain this new world, but it's tough because these are the people that are also evaluating you at the same time. But it always kind of makes me scratch my head too, to say, well, then how can they give you a good evaluation if they don't understand the thing you're looking at? It's like if you're going to your doctor and you're like, doctor, my heart hurts. When he starts poking at your rib or your back, you're going to be like, maybe I need to go get another doctor, right?
Yeah, it's really frustrating. I found that in the past, just trying to figure out how to, I guess, just justify the fact that you're having to spend money on tools that aren't really effective in certain environments just because of the regulatory compliance guidelines that are affecting those things. So it's just
like we talked.
It's not great.
No, we talked about it at the start, and the amount of money, like when you put in, again, CISO business perspective, the amount of money that you're spending. I remember one organization we were in, we were all cloud. We had a very large cloud presence. It was more of a lift and shift type of environment at the time when I got there. And because they had been in the data center, the auditors and the regulator, whoever was involved, was used to seeing that we had AV installed everywhere. And so they wanted to see AV installed on all these systems in our cloud. And some of them, a lot of them, and year over year were more ephemeral. We were spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to have agents on boxes and teams of people to try to make sure it all stayed up, when at the end of the day, that wasn't the right approach. So even from a business risk perspective, the risk there was that we had this false sense of security, that just because we spent a lot of money to put these things, that we were safe because that's what the auditors knew. When in actuality, we could have used that team to do much better things. We could have used the money to do much better things, but we needed it. And that's one of the challenges that I found in that space. And there's other ones as well, but that was one of the big ones I remember.
And we have gaps on both sides, Eric, right? There's certain things that people expect to be in place that don't really make sense in the cloud. And then there's controls that are actually missing. Like just the identity problem by itself and understanding identity risk is not something that's in the normal GRC kind of purview, right? So how do you incorporate some of those in when you're also trying to get stuff out that's no longer valid?
I bring it back to things that are known. So access, how do I bring the identity stuff in? There's always access. There's always an identity least privilege in there and somewhat. So because those concepts are known and they're broad, that's how I work the identity stuff in. But to your point about people not knowing about this, I remember working with an organization, and they were early on in their journey, but they had found themselves in a very large cloud environment. And I remember talking to one of their senior people in their IAM team, and they felt confident that they had this identity thing buttoned up. And it was all user. That was the language they were using. And I could see their environment. And I said, do you know about these 5,000, non-people or machine identities in your cloud? And they're like, what? And you're like, did you know that over half of those identities have the ability to access your production data? And they're just like, we didn't even know those existed until just now. How do we even figure out how they have access to it? Like, that's truly the spot that a lot of organizations find themselves in today.
Yeah. You said it earlier around the role of the CISO shifting to more of a governance role, which is exactly how I laid out my 2015 strategy for Tenable, saying that everything was going to all be wrapped around app user data. So you must have read that at some point, because you kind of nailed that whole thesis today.
That's the way I think about it, right? It's like you gotta adapt with the times and still find a way to make it work. And like the education game is, as you know, it's a long pull, and you don't have time to wait, right? It's going to take years to educate, especially as you go higher up boards and C-suites on these cloud things. When really at the end of the day, your job is to present the risk. So you got to find ways to make that work. Yep.
Back to correlating cyber risk as a business risk. It's the best way to do it. Sounds like you've been pretty successful doing it. And hopefully others have learned a little bit from this interview today. Eric, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Awesome. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yes, awesome. We're going to take a quick break and then cover the leadership and communications articles for this week.